Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Monitor My Watershed and EnviroDIY, Open Source Environmental Sensors to Monitor Water Quality and Real-Time Access to Data. My name is Gabby. I'm the Training Associate at Waterkeeper Alliance, and I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Today's presenter, Dave B. Arscott, PhD, Executive Director and Research Scientist at Stroud Water Research Center, is going to give us a wonderful presentation, which I am very excited about. Just a few quick reminders. This webinar is being recorded and I will send it out later today or early tomorrow, along with the slides from today's presentation. We're going to be taking questions at the end, so you can either write your question in the question box on the side or raise your hand and I will unmute you to ask a question and then mute you again. If you have any problems with sound or any other technical issues, you can write it in the chat box and I'll try to figure that out for you all. Before we start with the presentation, we have 3 quick poll questions just to get to know the audience a little bit. So I'm going to bring those up real quick. First question, have you used a water quality sonde? I don't know how to pronounce that, meter. Quick.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, a couple more seconds to answer, and then I'm going to close that poll up. All right, and here are the results. All right. Looks like we have a mix.
Yeah.
All right, pulling up the next poll question. Do you have real-time water quality sensors deployed? And just to... All right, gonna close it up soon. A couple more seconds. And here are the results. Okay, gonna hide this and bring up the last poll question. Have you ever built a water quality monitoring device? And I'm going to close up this poll. Here are the results.
Okay, a couple out there. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Just one second while I make you the presenter.
Okay, are we seeing my screen?
Yep.
Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation to deliver the webinar. Thanks, Waterkeeper Alliance. I think probably before I get going, I should just wish you all well in these unprecedented times. Stay safe and look forward to meeting some of you in the future if we're allowed to have face-to-face contact. We're all working virtually as best we can, so you have an inside look at my dining room. Stroud Center remains active and working, and this is one example of how we're getting by these days. So I've been asked to share with you work that the Stroud Center has been doing with many different people, collaborators across the country, and in Monitor My Watershed and our EnviroDIY.org online tools and programs. And what I'm going to cover today is open source environmental systems to monitor water quality with real-time access to data. These are do-it-yourself devices that can for measuring certain parameters of water quality, most notably water temperature, water depth, electrical conductivity, and turbidity. Those are our most frequently used sensors. I'd like to acknowledge the team of people at the Stroud Center, which is actually more than what I'm showing here, but certainly we wouldn't be where we are without a hardworking team at the Stroud Center to learn the tools, work with them, develop educational materials, and share what I'm going to share today. We also have collaborators at Limnotech, which is a private consulting firm with offices around the country. Anthony Alpenkamp was a previous employee at the Stroud Center, and Limnotech now houses the monitormywatershed.org tool for data visualization that I'm going to show you in just a minute or a little bit. And Jeff Forsberg and his team and students at Utah State University were instrumental in writing the software for Monitor My Watershed. So you can see from the pictures on the right-hand side, the equipment side of the EnviroDIY and Monitor My Watershed program that we've put together, ranging from the internal electronics or the datalogger board to the housing and waterproof container and sensors, and then a couple pictures of that box deployed screen side, with the far right picture showing the sensors going into the water next to a water level, a visual staff gauge. So before I get into things, I'll just let you know, if many of you may know of the Stroud Water Research Center. We're located in Avondale, Pennsylvania, about 50 minutes west of Philadelphia, and lots of different ways you can connect and learn more about the Stroud Water Research Center. So here are just a few. If you hit stroudcenter.org, you'll have connections to all of those other social media platforms that we utilize as well. The tools that I'm going to share with you today are shown here and where you can access them. We'll get to a live web view momentarily for all three of these resources. Wiki Watershed is our umbrella web page where we have many different online water quality related tools and information. And within Wiki Watershed, you'll see links to Monitor My Watershed and EnviroDIY that we'll talk about today. So I want to start with this EnviroDIY thing. What is it? It's a community of enthusiasts, and we're sharing do-it-yourself ideas and programming and all sorts of information for environmental science and monitoring. And of course, the Stroud Water Research Center utilizes these tools for water measurement, water monitoring. The community is really built around the concept of open source. This is open source compatible hardware and software. EnviroDIY is a web-based forum for users to help each other and ask questions and learn more and share your successes. Part of EnviroDIY is connected to Monitor My Watershed that provides web-based mapping and data capture visualization tools. And then the Stroud Center gets involved with a variety of training. The webinar here today is one example of a very short 50-minute introductory session, but we offer longer workshops from time to time, depending on the needs and the funding environment available. So together, EnviroDIY Monitor My Watershed is this open source system for low-cost real-time monitoring, a device that's sitting out in the wild, reporting to a cell tower or a Wi-Fi, sending data in real time to a web software where you can view those data instantaneously if the wireless connections are all functioning properly. We say low cost, it's not no cost, but it's a little bit more affordable than some other approaches, but the cost really comes in the effort and the learning to build, program, deploy, and maintain these systems. And you'll get some feeling for that as we move through the next 40 minutes. So on the right there, you saw Monitor My Watershed with points all over the map. Each of those points is a station deployed in the wild. The green ones have data reporting recently. The red ones are out of date for current data, but they're likely still deployed and perhaps logging data to an internal memory card. This web tool also allows you to visualize those data, and I'll drill down on what a graph like that means, but we can see data come in at real time. Our workshops that we often provide can be half day to 3 days worth of training. And we typically cover these topics in some detail, but they are tailored for beginners. We can move into advanced classes as well. There's learning about the hardware components and the sensors. There's programming with open source software that might startle some people as they're moving into thinking about this resource. I'll help by saying that a lot of the code is already written, and it's more about knowing how to copy and paste and maybe read a few lines of code and edit code, and not being afraid to ask questions on the web forum if you're running into difficulty. Then, of course, there's assembly, thinking about waterproofing and deploying this device in the wild against the elements and the critters and the people that are out there. Those strategies for deployment as well. Thinking through, once it's deployed, are these sensors providing quality data? How can you tell? When does that need maintenance or cleaning or replacement? And then, of course, getting attendees familiar with the online data capture and visualization systems, and starting to think about, what do these data mean? How do I analyze them and interpret these data? So that's a glimpse at our longer workshops. We have one that was scheduled to come up shortly for an in-person training. That's been changed to a virtual, and unfortunately we're full with attendees at this point, but we do have plans to offer that sort of workshop again in the near future. So just a couple pictures of some of the workshops we've done in the past, showing attendees interacting with their computers and the hardware, and getting a chance to get out in the field and see how these things are deployed. The woman down in the bottom image in the lavender shirt is Shannon Hicks. She's our research engineer that's helped build, design and build the datalogger board that I'm going to share with you, and helps a lot with our hardware technology and software coding. So why did the Stroud Center get involved with this? Our initial motivations were our own research and monitoring needs. There's some cost efficiencies to be gained to do these things yourself. And eventually we recognized the need, and there's a desire for more and more people out there to have continuous real-time monitoring stations, whether they're citizen scientists or volunteers or the broader research community. And so there's likely on this phone call, your motivations for attending are diverse, but some of the circumstances or rationale for deploying these might be pollution monitoring, trying to get more data in high time frequency for these short-term storm events or pollution events to be captured. There's a growing need in general for real-time monitoring. They can be used to detect change over time, or perhaps bracket a known issue above and below an impact with two devices. So there's all sorts of different thoughts on how these can be useful for understanding freshwater systems. We do most of our work in streams and rivers, but they're certainly applicable to lakes and potentially wetlands, estuarine areas, although the salt environment is another factor to consider with some of the instrumentation. I think we're all searching for the ability to do more with less, lower cost solutions, so we can monitor more places with limited budget. And we have a desire for data transparency. And although you might not think so when you first get involved, the technology is becoming more simplified. And at the very least, I hope you'll agree that there's more learning resources for DIYers out there today than there was several years ago. So, you know, the vision included or was motivated by what we see that had transpired more than 15 years ago with Weather Underground and the opening up of climate stations or meteorological stations for anyone who wants to purchase a low-cost device and connect to Weather Underground. Here's a picture of the Wonder map on Weather Underground, wonderground.com. And this is this morning. I went to the map and clicked on the Stroud Water Research Center's device that we have deployed. So you're seeing this morning a nice temperature in the field where that's deployed. We're have a nice, beautiful day here at the Stroud Center. And of course, underlaying that Wonderground website, you can get more data on that weather station. And here's a picture of our device that we purchased online, low cost meteorological station, and then connected that to Weather Underground. So that's the vision for a water quality, water monitoring network. So the EnviroDIY program sort of starts with the hardware. What is the hardware? I'll give you a glimpse into that, and maybe what is an EnviroDIY sensor station. It's really whatever you want it to be. The Stroud Center has posted our standard setup and manual for building and deploying a typical sensor station, real-time sensor station with conductivity, temperature, depth, and sensors. But the more you dig into it, the more you might recognize how flexible the platform is, and you can make it into whatever you want it to be. And again, the core of this is sharing how we're doing things, sharing code in the open source spirit. We're using the Arduino platform, but there are other open source platforms that are out there. Just a challenge to note that technology changes day by day. So if you're going to get involved in the program, just recognize that things change regularly and improve, we hope. There's updates for software, there's updates to how devices communicate over mobile or Wi-Fi networks, etc. So I've mentioned Arduino several times, but what is this? Arduino is a company, a open source hardware environment, and that company sells boards that are branded Arduino through the company, but they also share all of the designs for those devices so someone can derivatize it and change the schematic and add functionality to their board. And then there's a basic software programming environment, Arduino software stack. And there are other options for programming your Arduino device as well. So it's not just a company, it's a software hardware platform using a certain standard programming protocol. And it really allows for anyone to manufacture hardware that's Arduino compatible and programmable. Here's several of the Arduino products. To start, the Uno and the Pro, different types of boards that have different functionality that you can plug batteries onto and sensors and connect them to mobile Wi-Fi devices, etc. Arduino is another product out there, Adafruit. And then you can see sort of the stackability of of these electronics to add functionality as one approach. So maybe 12 years ago, 10 years ago, the Stroud Center got involved with working with these devices and eventually recognized that we should create our own device that has all the functions there that meet our needs. So our research engineer, Shannon Hicks, got to work and created the Stroud EnviroDIY Mayfly data logger there on the far right. And the stacked component in red there is some sort of wireless communication board. And there's all sorts of other pins to plug sensors and batteries and solar panels into that board and connect it to a computer and program it and then deploy it. The software environment, that was an extra slide. I'll skip over that one. So not only have we built the Mayfly data logger board, we have advanced it over time. Version 5 is fairly stable. We are working towards another version update in the future, and small things change have been added to it to make fixes or improve functionality. You may not be able to read this slide, but we have all of these resources available on our website. I'll show you where in a moment to learn how to use the board and what all of the different features of the board do and how you plug various components into this board. At the core is a fairly robust microprocessor as well as a high precision clock that keeps the internal timing on the board from drifting too much over a year's worth of deployment. And time drift is an important thing to think about if you're going to have a long-term deployed device out in the wild. For those sort of techie people out there, you may have seen, you may be using other devices. This just shows the Mayfly data logger compared to the Arduino Uno. If you're familiar with any of these terms, you can see some of the design differences and capacity differences of the Mayfly data logger board. So that was an introduction to the data logger board. But to get to the endpoint we'd like to get, we have to start thinking about what else we need. So you see a few accessories here: a battery, an SD card. Actually, there's a micro SD card that goes into the Mayfly data logger, waterproof boxes, solar panel, and some cell phone modules. The cost of those can range anywhere from $140 to $250, $300, depending on the choices you make. Some of these are available from a Amazon.com site that the Stroud Center maintains, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Oh, I'll get to that right now. Forgot my next slide. So unfortunately, our stock is currently unavailable, and at the moment, we are unable to refill our storefront because of our limited work environment at the moment, but we will replenish this as soon as we can. So we sell the data logger board as just the data logger board on Amazon. And then we also have a kit, which comes with a small waterproof box, a small solar panel, SD cards, and some connectors. So you still have to search for other components such as the lithium-ion battery pack and other pieces to make this a true water quality monitoring device. But we also have a guidance on all of those products that we use on our EnviroDIY website. I'll get to in a moment. Closer look at some of the communication hardware. These are just examples of different wireless communication devices that plug in and are programmable, compatible for programming with Arduino devices. Then comes the sensors. This is where maybe the cost goes up as you choose what type of sensor you'd like to use or what measurements you need to make. And of course, there are limitations. Technology is constantly changing and updates are made. The Stroud Center does not manufacture or produce any of these sensors. We utilize commercially available bare wire sensors that often have calibrations and have been certified by the National Institute of Science Measurement, or NIST. And so there's a benefit of purchasing these commercially available sensors for your confidence in the robustness of the data or what it's measuring. These are just examples of different types of sensors. The two that we utilize the most are on your far right, which is a Campbell Scientific turbidity sensor. Campbell Scientific is currently in revision for their next generation of turbidity sensors, and we expect them to have a new model out sometime early this year. The sensor on the far right is a CTD, or conductivity, temperature, and depth sensor that is made by a company formerly known as Decagon and is now called the Meter Group. And we could go on. There are ways to utilize Arduino devices or the Mayfly datalogger board to connect to other devices. And there is some information out there in the EnviroDIY.org web resources on how to connect to some of these devices. So in all, when you add the choices of sensors into this sort of package, one might be looking at maybe $1,000 for a turbidity or a CTD station, and maybe $2,500 for a CTD with turbidity. All those prices go up and down with market value, so that's a disclaimer that these are not up-to-date, last-minute pricing for exactly what you might purchase. So this sort of says it all from the hardware perspective of what I just ran through, showing you from sort of soup to nuts on the hardware, how we create a waterproof, robust system to deploy in the field and make measurements. A few more pictures of deployments. We've deployed with many partners and advised citizen science organizations and volunteer organizations on many different deployments. Here's an example of the types of data that come in. The top chart shows depth in blue in millimeters, and conductivity, which is sort of the ionic strength or measure of salt concentration in the water, among other things. The red line shows that over about a 48-hour period. We can see the water level goes up. That's likely due to rain. The conductivity is sort of changing in here and perhaps is moving up as maybe salts are washed into the waterway. If this is a winter time period, that makes sense. The lower graph is turbidity in NTU units, nephelometric turbidity units. And you can see when the water level goes up, probably due to a storm event, turbidity goes up and then falls. So that's a simple analysis of a hydrograph and some monitoring in a stream somewhere in the Delaware River Basin. All right, so I'd like to jump to the web and show you a few of these resources. And I have much queued up over here. Hopefully you're now seeing wikiwatershed.org. And this is the homepage. You can go to wikiwatershed.org now, and it should look exactly like this. There are many different resources available here. You may have come across Model My Watershed. That'll be a subject of another webinar sometime later. I think for the Waterkeeper annual conference that was to be down in Miami, I was going to present on Model My Watershed. And I think we're working on making that available as a virtual to the Waterkeeper Alliance constituents in the near future. And then Monitor My Watershed and EnviroDIY are the two resources that I've been talking about so far. So if we click on Visit EnviroDIY, we would open up this web page. Many different resources. You have free access to this website. You can create a login if you would like. If you want to post a question or ask a question, you of course need to register and then log in to take advantage of the forum and the other environments for communicating with the broader group. So, you know, this website is really supported by the Stroud Research Center. It's an initiative of ours, but the intent is for anyone doing open source environmental monitoring and progressing the knowledge of how we all work together in this framework. We encourage you to use the website to post your project and new information. We have more than 600 contributors at this point, growing every year. You can see the latest in community activities from some of the more actively engaged developers or utilizers of the information. We have, of course, we use this as a way to share all of our efforts to support everyone utilizing the EnviroDIY Mayfly datalogger. And you can click here, or there's a drop down to learn how to get started. And if you click on that drop down, you get started with the Mayfly. You move through some introductory material on what is the Mayfly, and then you can dig down deeper into hardware details, software coding, and we have a very comprehensive manual along with video tutorials for some parts of the manual. If you're interested in sort of following the recipe of how we have put together our sensor station. So we do get very detailed here, but there's always questions that you might come across. And if you have questions, you're trying to work through this and have questions, we ask you to post questions to the EnviroDIY.org website. That way, not just Stroud Center can answer, but anyone else out there that can provide some help for you. So you're likely to get a quicker answer if you interact with this website. There's also a tutorial that we posted last year, not necessarily new anymore, but this is a blog that's intended to get users doing Arduino environmental monitoring like pro, right? So the main point is there's many different resources on this website to learn more. There's manuals, videos, forums, and help resources. There's also, when it comes to sharing software code, we utilize GitHub. There's a little link up in the corner to jump over to our EnviroDIY GitHub repository. And here's where you can get really technical with capturing source coding that can then be utilized to program your environmental sensor project. And of course, we have resources that are specific to the EnviroDIY Mayfly datalogger here that link directly to the manual that teaches you how to build it yourself. Right, I want to check my slideshow to see that I covered those. So for coding help, I showed you the EnviroDIY web link to learn more of the new tutorial that's there. But I also would share with you that there are many other resources out there for learning Arduino code and digging into that part of this project. Circuit.io has quite in-depth resources for Arduino code, and there are many, many introductory Arduino programming books available in online stores all over. So the last step here is to show you a little bit more of Monitor My Watershed. So I will go back and click on that. When you go to, when you click on Wiki Watershed, Monitor My Watershed, you will launch an app and opens up Monitor My Watershed. Technically, this is hosted by our colleagues at Limbatech, and we interact with the programmers there regularly to facilitate the functioning and update to this web resource. So when you program your monitoring device, it doesn't have to necessarily be the Mayfly datalogger board. You can begin to understand how that device would be programmed to communicate with the internet through a Wi-Fi device or hardwired device. And if you sign up, if you register on Monitor My Watershed, you'll get a free account. You would go through a registration process for deploying a new device out in the wild. And maybe I will go back here to our Register a Site page, where this is now you're ready to program the final steps and ultimately deploy this device. We'd like to have you submit a site code. We have some recommendations, but it's your choice. The site name, the stream type, the stream name, major watershed, etc., latitude, longitude. This way it can be registered on a map. And you also then need to, I thought I had that scrolling up. You also need to then tell the website what sensors do you have so that the software knows what information is going to be sent to it. Once you do all of those things, you'll get a code from Monitor My Watershed that you need to paste onto your program to load onto your device. And that code is a token that tells the device how to send data to Monitor My Watershed, and it gives permission to do so. So once you move through that registration process, and you can register your compatible datalogger here, you would turn your device on, deploy it in the wild, and at some point then, your site would be registered and show up on this global map of devices around the world. So, of course, at the Stroud Center, we've been incredibly active, but we have colleagues in a growing number of geographies utilizing these devices. There's a lot of red up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Red River in the north because it's still largely winter, and those sensors get taken out during ice winter time period. So I was going to quickly show you one of these sites or a couple of these sites and zoom into a cluster here. You can click on, there's many different ways to look for information. This is a site called Rocky Run, and when you click here, you can view data for that site. When you open that site, you see the metadata or the supplemental information for Rocky Run. This is a station that's curated by Nature Conservancy personnel, Jim Hatchadorian. And if you scroll down, you can begin to see some of the data coming in. And I did click on the wrong one here. I meant to click on Pickering. Sorry about that. And Carol Armstrong in Montgomery School. Carol is involved with the Stroud Water Research Center. So here you can see the last 72 hours of water depth and temperature, conductivity, turbidity. There's two types of turbidity. There's a high end and a low end on that sensor. There's temperature in the box, in the monitoring device itself. And then we also provide battery voltage that can help you understand whether your data logger system is functioning properly and the batteries are recharging through the solar panel. There's a way to get even more complete data from the website using the time series analyst. And if we click on view data for this site, we eventually come to the data time series analyst resource that's connected to Monitor My Watershed, where we can see all of the data for any time period for which we've deployed. So here we're just looking back about a month of data. There's a lot going on with the graph. It could be a little bit dizzying because I've added electrical conductivity, water depth in blue, temperature in orange, and turbidity in red. And we can see that turbidity gets fouled and gives some crazy readings. And that's one reason why you need to get out to your sensor station, particularly in advance and after storm, to clean debris from your turbidity station. You can zoom, and I'm just using the scroll bar on my mouse to zoom in time and very quickly look at different and drag to move your time around. So we can see the blue water level went up, turbidity in red goes up at that same time. Our green conductivity, we have some dilution because rainwater has less ion and salty material than water draining the landscape or overland flow or groundwater contribution. And as the storm passes, the conductivity comes back up to sort of baseline conditions and turbidity goes down. So that's an example of Monitor My Watershed and its utility. There is plenty to go into as far as what do these data tell me? How can I use it? How do I maintain the system? But of course, those are subject for a little bit more time and detail in our workshops. And now I'm going to click through some slides just to catch up to where I was. I did share with you the resource for building your own sensor station, programming, building, installing, managing your station. That's available on EnviroDIY. Already mentioned to you workshops that we often offer. We typically, if an organization would like a workshop, we work with them to find funding to make it happen. There are some other resources on the web page as well. There's a field visit data page for collecting supplemental data around your real-time monitoring station. I wanted to sort of close by sharing with you how and why and what we're doing continuously, where we're funded to work. We are involved with a project in the Delaware River Basin supported by the William Penn Foundation, where we support citizen science and monitoring at various locations with more than 50 nonprofits in our geography to utilize some of these resources. So we have some resources to work in that geography. This is just an example of this initiative, the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, where there are many organizations working to implement agricultural best management practices, protect forest land, and do suburban stormwater management projects. We had funding from the EPA through an environmental education program that concluded last year. And I just wanted to show this as an example of sort of collaborative fundraising with partners to build projects in various geographies. And here we collaborated with Delaware Riverkeeper, among many others, to really build the initial resources that you're seeing online now, along with our William Penn funding, and pilot workshops really all over the country. So from 2016 to 18, we had workshops in all those geographies at the bottom with all of those organizational logos named. Last summer, we had a small pocket of funding from the Brookby Foundation to get involved with Michigan Trout Unlimited to help them deploy some of these, build and deploy some of these devices in Michigan and give a workshop for their constituents in Western Michigan. We received some funding from QUASI, which is the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences, to give a 2-day workshop at the Stroud Center last year with colleagues from Oregon State and a different open source platform. The feedback was really good there. This was largely for undergraduate, graduate students, and maybe a few professors from sort of QUASI priorities. And we do have resources to repeat this workshop late in 2020. But of course, that's all dependent on what transpires with the COVID pandemic. And there's many other examples I can give of other organizations adopting and utilizing open source hardware and software and interacting with the EnviroDIY Mayfly logger or Monitor My Watershed and expanding their volunteer monitoring programs. And I would just sort of close with a message to Waterkeeper Alliance that we have worked with colleagues at Waterkeeper Alliance to put proposals in for future work to expand our relationships with you all, Stroud Center and Waterkeeper Alliance, as well as Trout Unlimited, to further expand and promote, utilize this program. And of course, those grants are still pending, so I won't say any more about that. If you're in Pennsylvania and you're a waterkeeper in Pennsylvania, we can offer workshops utilizing funds from Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to facilitate workshops and facilitate transfer of knowledge. What we can't do is go out and monitor for anyone, but we can certainly help. So if you're interested in setting up a workshop, we have a way to do that with you all. And in fact, I know there's many of you dialing in from Pennsylvania today, and today's workshop is partially sponsored by the Seesaw grant. So thank you to the Seesaw Consortium and Pennsylvania DEP. So with that, I'll just put the resources up there again. I believe the webinar is being recorded and there's time for questions. So I would open it up for any questions you might have. And Gabby would help facilitate that.
Yes, thank you so much. That was very informative. And we've gotten a few questions, and just a reminder that it's not too late. We still have some time. So I'll read this question that I have right here. This is from Diego. Can you use the devices in karstic environments where most of the water is underground?
Yeah, so that karst watersheds are challenging. You know, the sensor itself would need to be physically located where you want to monitor the water or the system, and that can be a challenge getting things underground. We have utilized the Mayfly data logger in some shallow groundwater wells. That depends on the length of the cabling system to the sensor itself. And our experience is some of these sensors, the cable can be actually quite expensive. So the longer the cable, the more cost. But there certainly are limitations to get deep groundwater measurement.
Right, great, thank you. Another question.
Well, I guess I would just follow up that the data logger part that communicates with the network sort of needs to be exposed so that it can communicate in real time. However, the Mayfly data logger also has onboard SD cards, so you don't have to utilize the real-time aspect. You can log your data right to the card and then retrieve it and download those data.
Okay, thank you. This question is from Jim. Is there any possibility to get weather data linked to MonMW? Monitor My Watershed.
Yes, there is. I would ask you to query that on EnviroDIY. There are several sensors that have been registered that are meteorological sensors in the site registration part. So if you're using a sensor connected to your EnviroDIY data logger system that we do not have registered in Monitor My Watershed, you can send a request to have that sensor registered, and then there'll be a protocol for accepting data from that particular device. And some of that requires detailed information about the manufacturer and the model number so that we can assign the unique code to the type of data that sensor is sending. But I believe there is already some precipitation, wind, and other sensors available in the catalog on Monitor My Watershed.
Okay. This is from Matt. Can you talk about how you install sensors, specifically anchoring sensors in the stream bed or bank?
Yeah, I didn't touch much on the deployment, but that's once you have a successfully functioning device, the big challenge is deploying these things. There are so many obstacles to having your instruments survive in the wild. For stream monitoring, we have some video tutorials available on EnviroDIY on how we anchor our devices, our sensors into the stream and hide the cable or tuck the cable to the stream bed and up the stream bank, protect it from critters like squirrels and beavers and other things. We basic components there is a small piece of rebar, a long pipe to mount the sensor station on the bank. But in the water is a post. I believe it's a 3-foot metal post with pre-drilled holes in it. We pound that post into the stream bed, and the value of having these pre-drilled holes in the post is that you can then safety pin your sensor at a known depth to that post. And that's important to fix it, but also you need to be able to get in and clean your device. You may want to remove it from its mounting device. So you can unpin it, pull it out, clean the device, and then go back and put it in the exact same pin and be fairly confident you're not changing the depth at which you're referencing your stream condition. So there are tips in the manual I showed you, as well as video resources on EnviroDIY.
All right, great. It looks like we have time for probably just one more question. And if we don't get to your question, I can send all of these to Dave and we can figure out if we can answer some of these. Okay, so this question is from Damon. Are there good open source, actually, I'm not sure what this question is saying. Sorry about that, Damon. All right, this question is from Tracy. Do you know of any groups using the sensor system to monitor lakes?
Yes, actually, there are those monitoring lakes, but various components of the system. The most advanced effort I know of is in the Great Lakes, and I want to make sure I get the name right. Great Lakes Data Watershed, or GLDW.org. They've developed some interesting resources that utilize the Mayfly datalogger and send the data to their own data capture, data visualization system. And Limnatech as well is working with these open source systems in some of the monitoring applications they do as well. I'm not aware of any lake systems that are specifically posted to monitor my watershed at the moment, although I haven't scanned every single EnviroDIY sensor station here.
Okay, we didn't get to all the questions, but again, I can send them and try to get as many answered as possible. I want to thank everyone for joining us, including Dave. Thank you so much. And as a reminder, I'll be sending out this recording with the slides. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. It's been a pleasure.
All right, bye.